Good afternoon. Happy National Mushroom Month. I'm Bart Minor, President of the Mushroom Council. Thank you for joining us for our annual industry market review. We look forward to sharing both a look back and a look ahead today. Here's a look at today's agenda. We begin with a State of the Industry report delivered by the Mushroom Council's strategic consultant, Dr. Mark Lang. Dr. Lang will provide an analysis of shipments to date and his outlook for the next few years. Then we'll hear from Anne-Marie Roerink, creator of Power of Produce, you may have heard of, who will share a retail performance outlook for produce and mushrooms, as well as Marie Molde from Datassential with a report of the state of food service. Dr. Tim Richards will then walk us through the findings of the econometric study he conducted on the Mushroom Council's past 5 years of activities and exercises are required by the USDA every 5 years to assess the efficacy and value of marketing programs conducted by the council. And finally, Dr. Lang will present a review of the Mushroom Council's overarching strategies and objectives for the promotion of fresh mushrooms. And to sum up, we'll watch a brief year-in review video that recaps the activities conducted over the past year, which also showcases tactics that will carry us into 2022. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Sonia Beltran, Director of Operations, First Generation Farms, and Chair of the Mushroom Council, who this year is terming out, completing 6 years of service to the industry. Thank you, Sonia, for your service, and here's Sonia.
Thank you, Bart. Hello, all, and welcome. Thank you so much for attending our annual industry market review. We started to see the marketplace thrive and are pleased to share this look back at the activities of 2021. Our presentations today were pre-recorded. However, all speakers are logged on today in person along with my fellow council board members. Also, staff and consultants will share some additional comments and will be happy to answer your questions. We have time scheduled at the conclusion of all presentations to have a live question and answer session. Please make sure to use the Q&A feature here at the bottom of your Zoom screen to enter your questions as you think of them. You do not have to wait until the very end. Shortly, you will be hearing from Dr. Mark Lang. Dr. Lang has worked with the Mushroom Council for 5 years, supporting our marketing strategy, research, and execution. Dr. Lang is also a marketing professor at the University of Tampa. Before academia, he worked in food marketing for 20 years. He also led brand marketing at public supermarkets for over 10 years. And now, Dr. Mark Lang, State of the Industry Report.
Hello, I'm going to give a brief State of the Industry review. This is a chart showing combined shipments by year over a time frame that goes from year-to-date 2021 back to 1994. It's a chart that many of you have seen before. And running through that chart is a trend line that shows overall growth over time in shipments in the United States. So as we look at this chart, 2020, at the very end of the chart, shows a decline from the pre-COVID 10-year trend of steady growth averaging 3.2% per year. So if we look at this line that takes us back about 10 years, this section of the line here, we've been averaging about just over 3% per year in terms of shipments, pounds, growth. And in the last year, 2020, we saw this drop, obviously related to COVID. So looking at this more closely, we're looking at it in a different way. If we look at total shipment pounds by month, we can see the impact and pattern of COVID disruptions on 2020. That's the gray line on this chart. This is what happened in 2020 over the year from January through December, compared to the orange line, which is 2019, and the purple line, which is 2021 year to date. So 2020 shipments started out ahead of 2019. You can see at the beginning of the year here, but they fell sharply during the spring and recovered and stabilized to just below 2019 later in the year. That's this section here. By stabilization, I mean it resumed a seasonal pattern, mimicking previous years, but at a lower level. Year to date, 2021 shipments, that's the purple line that you see here, have essentially recovered to pre-COVID levels, but just slightly below on average. So on average, 2021 compared to 2019 is 98.6% of 19 year to date for the same period. So you can see that here where the purple line is kind of averaging just below the orange 2019 line. You could see here, interesting, that in March 2021, we hit a record level of shipments. We had a peak here, but then we fell back into line with 2019. So extending this year-to-date average, again, the purple line, this pacing for the rest of 2021, it gives us a picture of what the rest of the year could look like in terms of total shipments in pounds. And that's the purple line following at about 99 or 98.5% of 2019 for the rest of the year. So that means that we could reach 965 million pounds in 2021 compared to 927 million in 2020, but 979 million in 2019. So that's how we're just under 2019. So following this kind of pacing, this could put 2021 total pounds finishing at 1.4% lower than total 2019. So just behind 19, our last complete, real COVID-free year. But looking deeper into spring and March in 2020 gives us some further insight into the impact of COVID. So this is retail volume here. So you could see for 2020, the green line in this case, retail sales were up significantly through 2020, and we're looking strong into 2021. This is the purple line compared to 2019. We're looking at retail volume right now. So this strength in retail shows us that it was the food service decline, it must have been food service, that reduced sales and growth overall. Therefore, how food service recovers through 2021 and into 22 and 23 will have the greatest impact on overall shipments recovery and growth outlook. We'll talk about this some more right now. Projecting year-to-date 2021 shipments, projecting that trend out for the rest of the year, we can see on this familiar graph that 2021 total year recovers almost to 2019 levels. You could see here was 2019, here's our trend line, and here's us coming just up near that trend line. Back to 19 levels and back towards the long-term trend line. So what we're seeing in 2021 says that it looks like we will regress back to the norm or the mean as we put COVID behind us. So recalling the comment about food service, if Delta virus, Delta variant, does not shut down food service again, then year-to-date 2021 shipments points to an industry recovery to 2019 levels and then historic growth in the following years. So I would think of that as regaining our previous momentum when we get COVID behind us. But if Delta shuts down food service again, then 2021 numbers would fall short of recovering to 2019 levels and might look more like 2020 as a year, which would not be as a good an outlook. But no one knows what will happen with Delta over the next few months or the next several months and heading later into the fall. But looking at things as they are today, the most likely long-term outlook would be that we would recover back to 2019 levels over the next year and resume the long-term growth trend line after that. So that has our blue line on this graph moving back towards the regression line and kind of recovering back to historic growth over time. Looking at the domestic picture by year, the corresponding trend line, domestic shipments declined 8% in 2020, and you can see that on the graph here, the orange line, compared to 8% growth in imports. So also looking at pre-COVID domestic shipments, the trend from 2016 to 2019, this most recent period here, it shows that domestic shipments grew by only 0.02%, essentially flat, while imports grew by 10% during that same time. So this is giving us a perspective on the domestic shipments in this trending. So there remains a question of the impact of a domestic supply constraint on long-term shipment and sales growth. So we don't know if there's demand being generated that is not being met due to lack of supply. And we don't know if imports are coming in to satisfy all of the growth and demand, or is there demand left unsatisfied? That's a question that we've been discussing in our outlooks for a couple of years now. So we don't know the answer to that. So trying to look forward, taking the numbers that I just described, you can see on the left column here, these are years in a row. The green numbers in the center column are actual numbers. And in the right-hand column, that's year-over-year percentage growth. So when we look to the future, we should stick with things we know and understand and things we can reasonably assume. So we know the 5-year growth rate for pre-COVID, 2015 to 19. We know the growth that occurred here, and we know that it averaged 1.4%. We don't know what impact 2020 and COVID will have on future periods or whether any aspect of it will repeat or continue. So we recommend treating 2020 completely as a disrupted year and not having it play a role in forecasts or outlooks going forward. In fact, from a statistical analysis standpoint, we should treat it as an outlier and remove it from the trend analysis. So if we do that, we can project 2021 year to date out for the rest of the year, and that's the 965 million pounds that I talked about for the year. And we can use our 1.4% known growth rate pre-COVID and just use that as our growth rate going forward, assuming that when we get out of COVID, we resume previous growth rates. So we can put together an outlook of what the next 5 years might look like based on pacing from before COVID and based on our most reasonable estimate of 2021. So this trend line in red on the graph here would take total shipments from 965 million pounds in 2021 out to 1.022 billion pounds in 2025, where we actually crossed the billion-pound mark. That's an increase of 57 million pounds, or 6% over 4 years. So we're basically applying known historic stable growth rates to the future, starting with 2021 and looking forward. This is our safest outlook of what could happen, we think. So looking at value, the value index, which you also recognize this trend line that we've been building over years, we see a lot of volatility resulting from the COVID disruption in this latter part, the very end of the line here, ups and downs and some big ups and downs. The ups and downs most likely correspond, or almost entirely correspond, with shifts in volume between retail and food service as restaurants close and reopen. So you could see the value index increases with a shift to retail, and the value index decreases with a shift back to food service. So as the market stabilizes post-COVID, we should expect the value index to stabilize like we saw with volume and approach back to the long-term trend line. So that same thinking as we saw in our pounds outlook. So trying to carry the same kind of thinking forward using what we know and what we can fairly estimate. We know dollars from 2015 to 19, and we know they averaged an average annual growth of 2.2% per year. We see 2020 as a complete disruption. So we should do our best to try and estimate 2021 based on our pacing so far. And that's what that gives us here, this number here for 2021. And then we can try and have a lookout based on projecting 2.2% historic growth into the next few years. So that trend line would take total shipment dollars from 1.49 billion in 2021 to 1.62 billion in 2025. That would be an increase of $135 million or 9% over 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Now, please remember to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen here on your Zoom screen to enter your questions, and we'll answer them at the end of this meeting. Now, I'm pleased to introduce Anne-Marie Roerink. Anne-Marie is the president of 210 Analytics, providing marketing research with a specialty in food retailing, working closely with retailers, wholesalers, grower shippers, and trade associations. Anne-Marie has developed an excellent perspective on the ever-changing wants and needs of the produce consumer in a one-size-fits-no-one world. Prior to founding 210 Analytics, Anne-Marie was the head of research for the Food Marketing Institute. Anne-Marie designs and authors the annual Power Produce Study, which many of you may be familiar with. She does a presentation annually at the Southeast Produce Conference, along with similar studies in meat, deli, prepared, frozen, bakery, candy. She's basically the power of grocery stores guru. Anyway, Marie, thanks for attending, and let's see what Marie has to say.
Hi all, thanks for having me, and I'm going to take a quick 10 minutes to talk about mushroom sales at retail this far in the year between January and August. So let's have a look. But before we look at mushrooms specifically, I figured we should take a few seconds to look at the total produce performance. So what, of course, we see in 2020 is absolute record sales on both the vegetables and the fruit side. There were just weeks and months where categories were sitting 30, 40, 50% above normal levels. But that also meant the better we did in 2020, the harder the roadmap come March of 2021. And that's exactly why we're seeing vegetables drop off so much further than fruit, in addition to fruit having significant inflation here of late. And because we've always looked at a year-over-year performance in our industry, I did show that line, but I actually believe that the little orange and blue dots that signify where dollars are sitting relative to 2019 are even more important. We consider 2019 the pre-pandemic normal. And as you can see, both for vegetables and fruit, we still see dollars very comfortably above normal levels, of course, boosted a little bit by inflation for fruit, but altogether double-digit demand still versus normal. We do see over the first 9 months of 2021, dollars up about 1%, volume down about 5%. So that really indicates that inflation that I mentioned. If we look at the same exact trend line in dollars for mushrooms, you see how strong mushroom sales were relative to vegetables all throughout 2020. Mushrooms were up 31% versus normal in dollars. And that also meant that roadmap was incredibly hard to beat come March of 2021. That's why, again, I would focus your attention on the purple and orange. And as you can see, in purple is mushrooms, dollars versus 2021. And they're still sitting 12 to 17% above normal. So very solid gains still when you look at where we're sitting compared to a normal year. In terms of where we're sitting in the category of vegetables, you see that we are the 8th largest. And when you look across all fruits and vegetables, we're actually number 14 now. So we climbed up a place and we're getting very, very close to cucumber sales. Now, by and large, you see a lot of negatives on this number. Salad kits are actually doing extremely well. And that's an important one to keep in mind. Maybe something about the convenience of salad as it's on the mind of the consumer might be a place where we can play a role as mushrooms. When we look at mushroom volume, you see again that mushrooms is sitting far above vegetables really all throughout 2020. And again, that means that once we had to go up against those results, it was a lot harder to meet and beat that volume demand. Again, more importantly, in purple, you see mushroom demand relative to 2019, and you still see volume sit 8 to 12% above those normal demands. So still very solid gains. That sums up, if you look at the first 30 weeks of the year, the fact that we are a little bit down in dollars, units, and volume relative to a year ago, just to throw those numbers out there. But in green, below the mushrooms, you see double-digit gains in dollars, units, and volume versus 2019, the pre-pandemic normal. So some very good sales results there. Also, we have to keep in mind, as you saw the big difference between volume and dollars for produce altogether, that's not really something we've seen in mushrooms at retail a whole lot. In fact, the highest inflation versus a year ago ever got was in the second quarter of 2020, up about 3%. On the left side of your screen, you see that there really isn't a whole lot of difference between the average price per pound in 2019, 2020, or those first 30 weeks of 2021. And that it means that a lot of the growth on our end had to come from actual demand versus inflation boosted demand. Also, let's have a quick look here at really the 3 ways in which you can grow any category, any brand, any store really, and that is getting more people to buy, getting them to buy more often, and getting them to spend a little bit more per trip. What we saw in 2020 was a big boost in household penetration, and for the most part, we are holding on to that increase in household penetration, so that's really important. I'm not concerned about the small decline there. We might have more people buy in specialty channels, which are not measured in this particular look, or maybe things like farmers market. So this is a very good result. Even better is the increase that we're seeing in trips per year and spend per trip. That means that we are in the cart more often. People are also buying a little bit more, spending a little bit more, and that's really what's resulting in that continued strength for the first half, or the last 52 weeks. Opportunity and trip conversion, though, if we look at the exact same measures for total produce, you see that household penetration in the regular channels for total produce is extremely high, 56 trips per year. So it's really important for us to get in as many trips as we can, really have good conversion. And that really comes down to lots of meal occasions. And we're going to talk about that a little bit at the end once we are done with the numbers here. Top variety, let's have a look at that. Altogether, year to date through late July, we're looking at about 800 million for total mushrooms, and more than 400 million was contributed by white mushrooms, 225 million by browns. Those by far are your biggest categories. How goes white button mushrooms is pretty much how the total category fares. So you saw a little bit of pressure versus a year ago for the regular white button mushrooms. But if you look at the column on your right-hand side, nothing but pluses and very high gains for all the different varieties relative to 2019. If we do that same exact exercise for volume, you again see that big dominance of white button mushrooms, followed by browns. And again, when you compare to 2019, you see some fantastic numbers in terms of where volume demand sits relative to 2019. I do want to call out browns here real quick because they do have actually a volume and a dollar increase versus a year ago. So that category is trending very nicely. Let's have a quick deep dive here. As I mentioned, white button mushrooms make up 53% of total sales, 60% of total volume. And what you're seeing is just an incredible performance during 2020. And that just made it extremely hard to go up against those numbers. If we look at where they sit relative to 2019 with the little red dots, you still see enhanced demand versus normal. If we do the same exact thing for brown mushrooms, you see that demand spiked even higher. Of course, we're talking about a smaller base, so it's easy to get these higher percentage numbers. But altogether, we see that demand sits still 22 to 36% versus 2019. So some really good results there. And that's in the percentage dollars versus year ago. Couple of other insights we wanted to talk about. When we talk to consumers these days, a lot of them are looking for natural ways to boost immunity. Of course, vitamins have been going off the shelves, but we see really people take to foods as well. And what they're looking for are things like vitamin C, which resulted in record orange sales, but also vitamin D, vitamin B. And if you think about mushrooms, this is really a huge area for us to shine relative to immunity. So it's really important to talk about the features and the benefits. Oftentimes we highlight that idea of vitamin D, but not everybody understands what vitamin D can do for you, the benefit. And so it's fantastic to see some really retailers like Wegmans here on your right talk about the features and the benefits, mushrooms, B vitamins to unlock energy. What a great message. The other thing, what we're seeing is that there's really a desire for plant forward. We see, at least aspirationally, that people don't want to be just meat eaters. They really want to include a little bit more plant forward eating. But not always does that mean plant-based meat alternatives. In fact, they only have 10% household penetration. The whole idea of blending mushrooms with other items and bringing mushroom in as a protein addition or replacement is a huge opportunity for us. And really stressing mushrooms' role in that plant-forward diet, I think, is a big opportunity. Half makes you whole. Having the white plate showing on the package, talking about the healthfulness of mushrooms, and really just bringing out the convenience, the entertainment factor. These are all great ways to pop up in more baskets and in more meal occasions throughout the day. Because absolutely what we're seeing is convenience has taken on a huge role in 2021, as is entertaining. A lot of us are not entertaining in massive groups or going out to indoor restaurant settings, but we're seeing a lot more entertaining at the home. And that means people are looking for convenient solutions, both during the week as life is gearing back up, as well as entertaining solutions that are easy to be out there. Great picture there in the background with the chicken. This is one at Wegmans that talks about a meal idea, integrating mushrooms right into it. And I think that's a fantastic way to get mushrooms into more meal occasions. So that was my quick minute. Please reach out to me anytime. I'm going to be available for Q&A. Also find me on LinkedIn. I always have lots of industry updates. And back over to you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Again, I keep saying it, but go to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen there if you have any questions or comments. We'll get to them at the end. And now, Marie Molde is an account manager and registered dietitian with Datassential, bringing a strong background in food, nutrition, and business. Restaurant chains and suppliers have relied on Marie's expertise in menu and product development, and for years, she has helped food service and retail companies excel in innovation. Marie is a member of the Menus of Change Business Leadership Council with the CIA, as I am, working to inform, support, and confront issues that are surrounding the food industry today. Marie is proud to be on the team at Datassential, an organization that makes the industry smarter, providing trend software, predictive analytics, and consumer insights that help manufacturers, food retailers, and chain restaurants innovate and sell more intelligently. Marie?
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Marie Molde from Datassential. We are an insights firm for the food service industry. For the past 18 months, we've been collecting data on consumer attitudes and restaurant operator attitudes when it comes to how food service has been impacted by the pandemic. And I'm excited to share this research with you today. So the title sort of gives it away a bit. Food service is coming back, but there is a big but associated with that. So there are a number of factors that are still curtailing the growth of food service or even forcing more restaurants to close. Some of those, this list isn't exhaustive, but new variants that are happening, new mandates around sort of the proof of vaccination or other mandates at restaurants, potential for more lockdowns, inflation increasing, and also lots of issues with labor and supply chain, which we'll get into in more depth in just a second. We've been tracking, as I mentioned, operator attitudes. So our panel of operators is everyone from commercial restaurant owners to dining facility managers at colleges and universities. So this reflects really the whole spectrum of food service verticals. This is operator sentiment on their level of optimism as it relates to their business surviving the COVID crisis. And I'd like to call your attention to this green line here, which is operators who are cautiously optimistic, and this yellow line, which is operators who are worried but confident. And you can see that the cautiously optimistic reached its highest level in May of this year when vaccines were rolling out and things seemed really positive, but now that level has dropped. And meanwhile, those who are worried is growing. So it's about half and half at the moment. Half of operators are still cautiously optimistic about the return of food service, and half of operators are worried about it. Now, of course, every industry is having its own struggles when it comes to the impact of COVID-19, but restaurants are a bit unique in that literally every issue or every touch point in restaurants has been affected by the pandemic. So we've heard a lot about labor. Maybe there's a case of a truck is full of product ready to be shipped to a restaurant, but there's not a driver for it, or restaurants can't be at capacity even if they could in their location because they don't have enough staff to service the full restaurant. There's also all kinds of new costs, COVID-related costs, whether it's new safety procedures, takeout packaging costs, all of these things. And not all of them can be passed along to the consumer to help absorb some of these things. Some are taken on just directly by the operator themselves. So we're going to focus on three key issues as we think about the food service landscape together today: consumer attitudes, menu shrinkage, and supply chain issues, which we've already touched on briefly, but we'll go in further depth. So consumer attitudes, I will say these have run the gamut over the past year and a half. Consumers did tell us early on they missed restaurants. They were like ready to go back to restaurants, wanting restaurant food, missing the restaurant experience. But, although they crave that, their behavior is still it's changing based on the different circumstances. So our most recent data, this is from the end of July, 35% of Americans tell us they're definitely avoiding eating out right now. And that's a 10% increase since June and a 15% increase since March of this year. So that group is growing. About the same amount of folks, 34% of people say they're nervous about dining out, but they will still go. There's a bit of an increase there since June. So put those numbers together, it's almost 70% of the population is either avoiding restaurants or are nervous to eat out at restaurants today. And what does the consumer spend look like? You can see here on the left what it was in 2019 in food service. You can then see the dip that it took in 2020. Initially, we thought that 2021, 22 was going to be back to 2019 levels, but we're now projecting it's going to take until 2023 for consumer spend to be back at the level and actually a bit above the level that it was in 2019. So menu shrinkage is also happening. You know, how did menus change in the pandemic? Well, they shrank, and they shrank by 10.2% during COVID. So when we've asked people, what do you think menus shrunk by? People might guess 40%, 50%, 70%. You know, 10 might not sound that high, but if you put it into a bit of context, if you shrunk the average human, male, 10%, they would be 5 feet tall, and the average female would be 4'9". So that helps you understand that, you know, 10% really is a sizable change. And here, looking historically at how menus have grown and shrank in the past 10 or 12 years, we can see that every year in that middle column, menus do shrink to some extent. It happened at the financial crisis in a large way, but really the biggest, you know, you could call it record-breaking shrinkage of restaurant menus has happened during the pandemic, when the focus was on value promotions at restaurants, getting customers in the door, or at least, you know, ordering on an app or whatever it may be. And restaurant operators were removing some of the more expensive items from their menus. On that note, you know, we can look at individual ingredients and see which were gainers and which were decliners on the menu this year. You know, last year, 55.5% of menu ingredients grew, including mushrooms. They were increasing on menus. Then this past year, only 17.5% of ingredients grew, where a whopping 82.5% of ingredients declined on restaurant menus. And here we're looking more specifically by category. So you can compare 2020 gainers and decliners to 2021 gainers and decliners. So let's hone in on vegetables where mushrooms fall. In 2021, only 10.8% of vegetables have grown on menus, whereas about 90% of vegetables declined on menus this year. And looking specifically at mushrooms, well, if we compare it to 2019, we were on 80.2% of restaurant menus. And in 2021, mushrooms are found on 77.3% of restaurant menus. So bit of a decline there. But again, as we saw in the previous slide, it happened with almost all vegetables across menus. And whether it's distribution challenges, or maybe the ingredients become too expensive or are perceived to be too expensive, or other reasons, lots of items did decrease in menu penetration. In fact, most items decreased in menu penetration from the pandemic. Here we're looking at mushroom penetration by segment of food service, by day part, by region. You can see that the decreases in penetration were lowest at mid-scale restaurants, so operators like a Denny's, for example, and decreases were also smallest at dinner menus. And regionally, the decreases were pretty even across census regions of the US. We did dig deeper to find where mushrooms were growing. So these items here are menu items that had positive menu penetration. So chili and soups and fries and sandwiches and things that are easily transportable. Mushrooms increased in menu penetration when it comes to these items. Also, handheld proteins. We did see more operators adopt the blend this past year, which is so exciting to see, and also helps target that consumer who's looking for more health when it comes to their menu choices, which is a big group of Americans right now. We also saw sandwiches with mushrooms growing, so portobello sandwiches and things like that. Rounding out with some more supply chain information. So there are lots of supply chain disruptions, and that's really changing how restaurants are thinking about and approaching their menus. Here we're looking at operator experience with price over the past 3 months and which items they buy for their restaurants where they saw a big price increase. Chicken wings, beef, takeout packaging especially is in this column here with a big price increase. Fresh vegetables is middle of the list here. 11% of operators saw a big price increase with fresh veggies. But I would encourage us to add up these first two columns here, either a big price increase or a price increase, and that is the majority of operators seeing a price increase with all of these menu categories. So it really, except for flour, there's a majority in seeing a price increase. So really a present issue for restaurant operators. We're also hearing that they're experiencing shortages, so especially so with to-go packaging, again with chicken, with beef, and other animal proteins. Fresh vegetables, 24% of operators say they're experiencing a shortage. So in this case, they have a couple options. They can find a substitute, they can find another supplier, or they can simply drop these items from their menu. And we're seeing operators adopt all of those options. And as far as when these increases come, operators can either take the hit themselves or raise their menu prices. So what do they do there by category? Well, you can see that with some like eggs and flour and dairy and fresh vegetables, the majority of operators say they will take that hit. They will not pass the cost increase on to the consumer by raising menu prices. But for other products, particularly these animal-based proteins, the consumer is going to see that added cost by increased menu prices. And then looking to the future a bit, this isn't a necessarily positive statistic, but almost 80% of operators agree that they think that this inflation with ingredients and commodities will only get worse as we head toward the end of 2021. So thinking about the future, though, it's not all a negative story. It is going to be impacted by what happens with the variants and how individual cities and states approach these issues that we're experiencing. But some positive things that are happening. Well, firstly, restaurants are open. We are open, we're serving customers. We are a resilient industry and food service always has been. So we feel positive about the outlook for restaurants. Consumers are continuing to adapt. A big chunk of them are nervous, or maybe they're avoiding in-person dining for now, but we do hear from them that they do want to get back to restaurants. They want to support the industry. A couple key trends that involve mushrooms are really growing, even despite the pandemic. Plant-based and plant-forward is a major one. Climate and sustainability, which mushrooms have a great sustainability story. And also ketogenic as a diet, which mushrooms fit in well. That's a top growing health-related term, even at restaurants. And then mushroom LTOs that we saw chains launch this past year have also performed really well with consumers. And then thinking 2 years out, what are consumers going to be looking for? So looking to the future, what do they want? They want new innovation. They want to see cool new menu items, have things they've never had before. Also, excuse me, more plant-based items, more low carbon impact foods. So again, these trends that involve mushrooms are things consumers want to see more of. And then if you would like to dig in deeper to the data about how the industry is changing, please visit ifmaworld.com. This is a free tool and you can look at our projections for industry growth here. And I'd like to thank you at Datassential. We're so glad to be a partner of the Mushroom Council. I want to thank Steve Solomon for his collaboration on this presentation. And please reach out to me if you have any questions. I'd be glad to further connect. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Marie. And indeed, you may get some questions here. So now let's take a moment to hear from ag economist, Dr. Tim Richards. As I mentioned earlier, every 5 years, USDA requires programs like the Mushroom Council to perform an independent econometric review to provide investors, i.e. you growers, with some measure of the program's effectiveness. Internally, we not only look at the absolute value of this analysis, but in particular, we do take note of and incorporate specific tactical insights into our planning and recommendations. So Tim, let me give him a little background here, is a Morrison Chair of Agribusiness in the W.P. Carey School of Agribusiness at Arizona State University. He has published over 100 articles in top economics, marketing, and agricultural economics journals. He has won 12 Article of the Year awards, is co-editor of the American Journal of Ag Economics, and is on the editorial boards of 4 journals. The focus of his research is quantitative marketing, data analytics, retailing strategy, agricultural labor, and food policy. In addition to teaching, he does extensive consulting work in the food, retailing, and manufacturing industries for clients that include Walmart, Kroger, SuperValu, Hormel, Sara Lee, Foster Farms, just to name a few. So thank you, Tim, and let's see what he's got to say.
Morning. Thank you for letting me talk to you this morning. Not just because I enjoy doing these things, but I think they're important. Let me share my screen and I will present the results of the evaluation. Okay, so this was completed a few weeks ago. This is the five yearly Fair Act evaluation of the Mushroom Council marketing activities. My name is Tim Richards. I'm a Morrison Chair of Agribusiness at Arizona State University. I'm going to present a summary of my results today. I'm going to address 4 major models. There's lots of different results in the report if you want all the details. So I'm going to go over the 4 main approaches that we used. We looked at both the returns in both the retail market and the food service market. We looked at a media base, looking at print, online, this sort of thing, and a channel-based, meaning the type of message, whether they're nutrition or directed to the retail market or directed to the food service market. So we have 4 different sorts of results we're going to look at today. And we can provide some arguments as to the relevance of either, but I just want to provide the broadest swath of or a sample of the results that we looked at. And just a little bit of background, a little bit of context. This is probably not news to any of you, but I always like to understand the industry first. You know, I've done this several times, so an update in this case on what was going on in the industry since the last time I've done this analysis. As you can see this time, as I'm again sure you know, there was lots going on. Demand meaning shipments, you know, supply equals demand. So everything that's shipped, we assume is consumed somewhere. So we see that there was obvious COVID related disruptions toward the end, but a general over the last 5 years, kind of a general flattening out of shipments. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because if you look at the red curve, prices have generally been trending higher and then sometimes spiking up higher particularly in 2019. So because revenue and hence profit is the price times quantity minus cost, anytime price is higher, if demand is flat, profit can still be higher. So this is not necessarily a bad story. But in general, the story here is that the per capita consumption has been generally flat. There's lots of different potential causes for that. The higher prices that I documented are one reason. If prices are higher, people slide down demand curves. Demand obviously doesn't increase that much. There's in general just more competition for stomach share across all food industries every year. There's been demographic changes. There always is over a 5-year period. You know, coming out of a recession this time, you know, leaving it behind. Are there broader macroeconomic reasons for the industry? Just in talking with people on the ground in the industry, I think a lot of the reasons for the apparent reduction in demand, let's call it that, is just supply constraints, that there's been a lot of square feet coming off the market. So it looks like there may be a lower demand, but instead it's just higher prices. But the relevant question that we seek to answer in all this is, where would the state of the market be without the Mushroom Council? Just to give sort of a preview of my results, it would be much worse off. Meaning that the results are very strong, that there was a lot of benefit to doing the Mushroom Council activities over the last few years. So let me just, with that in mind, let me give you a brief explanation of what may be going on. And this will necessitate a little bit more Econ 101 than I'm sure you bargained for. But I just want to explain how we do the evaluation, just to show why I think that there may have been such high returns to Mushroom Council activities over the last few years. So this is basic Econ 101. Equilibrium price in the market is where demand and supply meet, right? Where the market clears. Everything that's produced is purchased at an equilibrium price. And there's a process by which the equilibrium price is determined. In terms of measuring the returns to promotion, we have to calculate what's called the increment in producer surplus. Producer surplus is a fancy term for profit, right? Basically, consumer surplus is the amount of value in the market. Think of it as the total amount that consumers are willing to pay for mushrooms. And that the area ABC, this triangle in the diagram, is the amount of consumer surplus. Producer surplus, on the other hand, is the amount of profit over the market price over the cost of production. So that's the triangle CBD, okay? So that is the lower triangle. So the total of both of those triangles is the total amount of welfare, we call it, generated by the market. Excuse me. The idea here, though, is that we measure promotion impact by measuring the incremental profit generated by promotion relative to the cost that it took to bring it on. So when we promote something, we hope to shift the demand curve out, which means that consumers are willing to pay more for every unit, or the same idea at the same price, they're willing to consume more of the item that's being promoted. So that demand curve shifts out. If the demand curve shifts out, there's hopefully a higher price in the market. So P prime, the P apostrophe is the new price. And we see that there's a gain in producer surplus. That gain in producer surplus is the gain in profit. We can calculate that geometrically. It's the difference between the triangle EFG, the bigger triangle on the bottom, and the old one, CBD. So I didn't have the old letters in there just to keep things clear, but it's that little trapezoid between P prime, P star, and the new equilibrium quantity. That's the gain in profit. Okay, so that's the total amount of return to a promotion program. If we look at a market in which supply has been constrained, we call that more inelastic supply. In terms of this simple diagram, it means that the supply curve is more vertical or more steep. If we look at that, if we move that supply curve to be more inelastic, it causes any price response to a promotion program to be accentuated, right? So we move from P star to a new P prime that's a lot higher than that other P prime that we saw. So our new profit triangle, that EFG triangle I talked about before, is potentially a lot bigger. So I think that's what we're seeing now. If we combine that supply constraint with the same amount of effect in the demand curve, we just get a lot more profit for the same size of a promotion program. So I think that's what's going on. So let's go through and just go through what the returns to the different programs were, just in a summary form. Again, you can look at the report to get all the kind of details and things. But just a couple notes on terminology first. We define returns as the benefit cost ratio. Benefit cost ratio is exactly the same as a return on investment. It's just a small mathematical difference in how they calculate. It's the same information. So a high BCR is going to be a high ROI and vice versa. It's just convention in sort of the industry that we have within academia of doing these things. We like to standardize our approaches, and I'll explain why in a minute, in order to be able to compare, across different programs and across the same program over time. So the benefit cost ratio is that incremental profit generated by a program, that EFG triangle, if you want, relative to the cost that it took for us to bring it on. So the amount of investment that we made in the market in order to start that advertising program, the ratio of benefit to that cost, the amount of investment, is our BCR. As I mentioned, we can easily calculate ROI as just 100 times that BCR minus 1. So we like to talk about ROI, or I like to talk about it because I'm a finance guy. We can look at ROI as a comparative measure to every other investment that we have potentially available to us. So we can compare that to what we call our opportunity cost of capital, right? So if we're making 7% on an investment, not on a savings account in a bank, but let's say making 7% on investment, and if your program's generating 10%, that's obviously above water, right? You're making more profit on that advertising program than you are in your opportunity cost of capital. All right, so let's look at the specific programs. Remember, there's 4 different ones I'm going to look at. So the first one was looking at the retail market, investing in different types of media. So as you can see, I calculated the returns in both the short run and the long run. So the long run is the total amount of time after which that program seemed to have lost effect. So maybe consumers forgot about it, maybe others advertised in order to compete and reduce the effectiveness just because there's rivalry in the market for advertising. So as we see, the returns to the most effective program here is online, clearly, over 18, just about 19 times the amount of investment in the program. So that's a rate of return of like 1,800%, which is obviously good in any world. One thing to note, that a benefit cost ratio below 1 is underwater, meaning that it's not returning its investment. All of the programs here in both the short and long run are above that 1 threshold, except for syndicated. Now, there's reasons why we can discuss, but in general, those are very small programs. There's what we call threshold effects. If a program is very small, it's not likely to be large enough to be able to reach a critical mass and be able to have an effect in the market. So I think that's what's going on. But online is clearly the most profitable in terms of the retail market. In terms of the food service market, though, it's a different story. Online is still profitable because it's above 1. It's returning at least the amount of its investment, but print is by far more profitable, over 5 times in the short run and almost 6 times the amount of investment in the long run. In terms of the channel returns, now this is more the type of message than the actual way that it's delivered as the media message was, or the media modeling effort was. So within the retail market, with respect to different sorts of channel returns, we see that the consumer nutrition messages were by far the most profitable, almost 8 times its investment, or a BCR of almost 8 in the long run. Retail is underwater in the short run, but profitable, strongly profitable, about 1.4, or that's a roughly 40% rate of return in the long run. And food service messaging in the retail market is underwater, as we'd expect, right? Because if these messages are targeted toward the food service market, it's only an indirect effect on what people actually buy in the retail store. If we switch to the food service channel and look at those same types of messages, we see that they're all profitable in the long run, but we see that the consumer nutrition messaging is again profitable, about 2.5 times the investment in the long run. But the food service targeted messages, as we'd expect, are about 2.8 times the investment in the long run. So that's saying that those food service messages targeted to the food service channel are indeed profitable and effective. Okay, so again, the retail messaging in the food service market is slightly profitable in the long run, but still above water. Everything works in the food service market, not quite as profitable as in the retail market. So just to put this in a little bit of context, as I mentioned, we like to talk in terms of BCRs for comparative purposes, meaning that we can compare a BCR in the mushroom market to a BCR in the beef market, and we can get a relative sense as to how profitable these activities are. A colleague of mine, Gary Williams at Texas A&M in 2017, published this study where he looked at BCRs from 27 different agricultural promotion groups. That's the APG abbreviation here. So it's a broad swath of the different organizations that are both federally and state sanctioned that are mandated to do this type of evaluation. So it covers a lot of value. We're talking about $624 million in program investment in 2015. But the interesting thing about these comparators is that they're calculated using virtually exactly the same method, because we have a set of best practices that we have to adhere to in doing these things. And we have met for lots of different years at academic meetings to hammer this out, to make sure that we do them the same. So they are directly comparable to each other. So Gary found, in looking at all of these different 27 programs, the weighted average BCR of about 11. Okay, so that's about 1,000% rate of return, which is very high. But if you look at the average that I found across all the different programs here, you look at the average short run is about 6.5, but the average long run is a little bit lower than the weighted average BCR, but still very strong, obviously, a little bit over 8.5. But if you look at the very highest of all of the returns within the Mushroom Council programming, we're looking at almost double what that weighted average BCR was that Dr. Williams found. So the weighted average BCR of over 18, just for reference sake. So conclusions then, that virtually all of the programs have positive returns. Within the retail market, the highest returns are to online and print. Now, the idea here is, in terms of these results, are not just sort of an ex post, this is how we did, but hopefully they're used to guide decision-making going forward. So you obviously want to put money into where they're the most profitable on the increment, or where you want to put your next dollar in. So my suggestion there would be the fundamental economics of this market say that you should dedicate more money to online. In the food service market, however, we find the opposite. The print ads tend to do better than online. I'm not sure, again, whether that's maybe a threshold effect, or maybe the opposite, that they're large enough that you're hitting that, what we call the period of diminishing marginal returns. But it appears that those targeted channel ads tend to be most effective, as that kind of makes sense, right? The retail targeted ads are likely to do better in retail, and the food service tends to be better, more functional in the food service market. In general, though, I don't think online appears to be fully saturated, meaning that you haven't exhausted those diminishing returns yet in the online space. And that seems to be where everything's going these days, that people look online for messaging, and that appears to show up just in terms of the basic returns to the program. All right, so if you've got any questions, I think Bart can likely tell you where to find me. Thank you for your time today.
Indeed, Mark, we know where to find you. You're here right now. So, and speaking of here right now, I do want to point out that I hope you've noticed that, you know, Anne-Marie Roerink, Marie Molde, Dr. Tim Richards are experts in their respective fields. I mean, their resumes are pretty strong, and we don't routinely bring these people to the table. So another way of saying, you do have your Q&A function down at the bottom of your page, and I would encourage you to take advantage of their presence and ask them any questions you might have, whether related to Mushroom Council stuff or not. But anyway, once they're here, take advantage of it. And now, at this time, I'd like to welcome back Dr. Mark Lang to provide a strategic review that sums up much of the insights you've heard this far as we look ahead to the next 5-year plan. Mark?
Hello, I'd like to share with you the strategic marketing plan that guides the marketing and communications that we do at the Mushroom Council. We're currently planning for a 5-year period that is 2021 through 2025. And we set objectives for consumers at the beginning of a planning period like this. The marketing objectives we have for consumers this period are the same as they were for last period. It is to increase awareness of fresh mushrooms among shoppers, increase favorable beliefs and attitudes, increase trial, and increase purchase intention, frequency, and amount. When we design our communications, we have 2 target customers in mind, two shopper groups. The first one is Gen X and baby boomers with medium to high food orientation and medium to high healthy eating mindset. They're generally focused on themselves and their family. This is our number 1 group currently, and they take up 60% of our emphasis. They are 65 and 69 million people in the marketplace, but they're declining in terms of demand in the total marketplace. The second group we look at is a younger group. It's Generation Z and millennials, also focused on with a high food orientation and a healthy eating mindset, and they're a little more focused on themselves. They are 67 and 72 million shoppers in the marketplace, and they're increasing in terms of demand. So our thinking as we plan is that we should begin to shift our target shopper emphasis later in this planning period from group 1 to group 2. So later in this 5-year period, we'll be focusing more on Gen Z and millennials because they'll make up more of the food shopping marketplace. So that's a change we will anticipate during the next planning period. We set similar objectives for the trade, retailers, and food service. So our first objective is to increase merchandising and promotion of fresh mushrooms across food service and retail points of distribution. The next one is to increase our support of industry sales teams in selling into their respective trade partners, the support we provide from the council. We also want to continue to drive awareness of and interest in the blend in the retail channel and to support expanded adoption and promotion there. We need to re-engage blend adoption and promotion in the food service channel post-COVID as things return back to normal. We want to begin to fully engage food service and retail with mushrooms as part of key emerging trends as well. And that's plant-based, it's immunity, it's sustainability, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later. When we think about trade audiences, we think about continuing supporting marketing to each of retail, food service, and schools. as channels. We want to continue to focus on mainstream, larger scale restaurant and food service operators and the distributors that serve them. We want to selectively engage with smaller specialty and larger, more progressive food retailers that are ones leading in the trends. We want to work with them. We want to continue with our increased focus on online shopping and digital marketing. So in our last marketing planning cycle, this became a new form of communications we wanted to emphasize, and we want to increase that into the next period, including with the trade. So some background thinking to what we're going to do going forward in the next period is the shift away from and back to food service due to COVID has presented a significant disruption to supply, demand, and marketing impact into 2022. So that's shaping our thinking right now, especially. We believe that over the next 5 years, the blend opportunity will begin to mature. And as the blend reaches maximum population penetration, when we feel like we've got it out to approaching the maximum of the shoppers, it will mature. So then it's time for us to develop the next areas of marketing emphasis in line with food and retail trends, like the ones I brought up earlier. Towards the end of the 2025 period, we should begin a shift in primary focus from the blend towards emerging trends in plant-based diets, health and immunity, including vitamin D, sustainability. So what we're thinking is towards the end of this period, these other ideas and trends will gain equal status with the blend, and the blend won't necessarily be our primary or our lead emphasis for marketing and communications. We'll have worked on building up on those others. When we think about marketing the blend over the next few years, we think we should continue to use it as a marketing platform to promote the benefits of fresh mushrooms. We should focus on maximizing the penetration of the mainstream population, going mainstream with the blend. We should increase direct-to-consumer engagement. That's talking directly to consumers and not talking to them through the trade, and that corresponds with mainstreaming. We should continue with a double-barreled message of flavor and taste, followed by better for you, and that's supported by our nutrition research. That's the strategy we've been following all along. And we should continue to drive adoption and promotion with mainstream retail and food service operators and distributors. So just keep pushing on what we've been doing because there's still some more ground for us to cover. Alternatively, when we think of strategies for marketing fresh mushrooms in general, we think we need to begin putting an increased emphasis on emerging trends in the marketplace. Nutrition labeling, you might hear us talk about put a label on it. That's where that's coming from. Health and immunity, feed your immune system is kind of a theme for that. Plant-based foods, that's meatless meals and products that we can associate with. And sustainability. You'll be hearing us talking about sustainability as our future. These are the themes that you should expect to see emerging within our communications and marketing in the next couple of years, even in the updates that you're seeing now. We should continue to reinforce mushrooms' role in good cooking. So the idea of emphasizing flavor, culinary interest in food, and the growing interest in sustainability. Those are things you should really be seeing from us. We should continue with increased focus on online shopping and digital promotions. You'll see this in another presentation on return on investment for marketing, that this is one of the areas of highest payoff for us in terms of our investments in communications. So not only are they on track and on strategy, they're also high payoff areas for us. So we should really keep up with that. And we should support merchandising and promotion best practices with mainstream retail and food service operators, supporting and working with our shipper and handler marketing and sales teams, growers. Looking at those themes, we see how they can relate together in a bigger picture, because not only are these themes that we want to bring into our communications and promotions, they're also the trends that are driving mushroom consumption now and into the future. And we think of the tagline or the idea that mushrooms are more delicious, nutritious, and sustainable. And the circles we have on this diagram kind of shows the amount of emphasis that we'll be putting on these ideas over the next couple of years. So a lot of emphasis on health and immunity and vitamin D coming out of COVID and heightened concerns about health and wellness. We've always got to maintain our role as a key food product that drives taste and culinary interest in meals and recipes. And then we need to start continue building and expanding our emphasis on sustainability as that becomes a global and a national interest in the food industry overall and in the economy. So when we look at these themes and we think about our marketing activities, we can place a lot of what we do onto these themes. So our activities and research around vitamin D and put a label on it and feed your immunity, all are hitting against health and immunity. The blend sits in the middle of all of these things because it is a tasty but healthy product. It drives a lot of taste and it is sustainable. So that's why it's been such an emphasis for us recently, is that it hits on all of these things. But associations and promotions we might be making with plant-based recipes and meals are things that align with this. And as we work on 2022 and 2023 right now, we're working on new ideas and new initiatives and what we can do in terms of growing our work around sustainability and reinforcing our work around taste and culinary emphasis of mushrooms. And we've set up task force to develop new thinking and new strategies in those areas so that we can be sure we're responding to all of the trends that are driving food and lifestyles in the United States today. Thank you.
Call it a shroom boom, mushroom mania, or a fungi frenzy. The marketplace in 2021 has found mushrooms claiming their rightful position in the spotlight. Prized for their delicious flavor, versatility, nutrition profile, and remarkable sustainability story, everything about mushrooms is relevant to today's trending topics. At the start of the year, while still in the midst of the global health crisis, the Mushroom Council launched the Feed Your Immune System campaign. The campaign informs consumers about how mushrooms and other select foods contain micronutrients that play a key role in supporting a healthy immune system. FeedYourImmuneSystem.com was created as the interactive and informative online hub for the campaign. Visitors to the site lingered for 4 times longer than typically spent on other sections of the website, proving how relevant this topic is in today's market conditions. The promotion also included a 3-month focused social media effort with dozens of influential media personalities and dietitians sharing creative recipes that pair mushrooms with other healthy foods, highlighting their immune-supporting nutrients. This achieved more than 19 million impressions, 7 million more than projected. The campaign's online ads attracted clicks at a rate 250% higher than typical, showing that the information resonated with consumers eager to feed their immune systems. And the campaign's PR initiatives have earned media coverage in print, online, and on television.
Here I have them in some fajitas, added them to some avocado toast, and they have immune-supporting nutrients like selenium, B vitamins, and vitamin D. The cool thing is mushrooms are the only produce in the produce aisle that has vitamin D. And just like humans can increase their vitamin D from UV sunlight, so can mushrooms.
Feed Your Immune System was extended into grocery stores in partnership with the Produce for Better Health Foundation. Together, we launched a retail toolkit with in-store signage promoting mushrooms and other immune-supporting produce. We also piloted an online cook-along event for supermarket dietitians that trained them how to conduct their own cook-alongs and how best to communicate the nutritional and flavor benefits of cooking with mushrooms. The Mushroom Council will continue the Feed Your Immune System campaign on an ongoing basis, evolving it to include fresh new tactics in the first quarter of 2022. When it comes to sustainability, mushrooms have an incredible story to tell. And with the importance being placed on sustainability by shoppers today, the Mushroom Council will continue to emphasize the mushroom sustainability story. Mushrooms are healthy on the plate and gentle on the planet, which is especially important to communicate during Earth Month in April. This year, the Mushroom Council developed new graphics that share sustainability facts in an easy-to-understand way. We also partnered with nutrition experts to share mushrooms' sustainable nutrition story and collaborated with several national accounts like Whole Foods and Eat the Change, who were proud to align with sustainably grown mushrooms. The Mushroom Council's years-long strategy to promote the blend expanded to new and broader audiences this year. What started in the kitchens of influential chefs and early adopter home cooks has now reached mainstream consumers thanks to a new partnership with the Food Network. As the #1 multimedia destination for all things food and cooking, the Food Network promoted mushrooms and the blend in its magazine, on its website, and on television. Food Network magazine featured our blended burger recipe contest, open to both home cooks and professionals, in the centerfold of its June issue, along with a special pull-out booklet of recipes made with the blend that ranged from tacos to noodle dishes to burgers. Food Network celebrity chef Cartier Brown from the popular show Delicious Miss Brown filmed a special video showing how to make a blended burger. It was shared on Food Network social media, as well as on the Mushroom Council's and Cartier's personal social media.
So I'm making a blended burger using a technique called the blend. I love adding mushrooms to meat because it adds a really earthy flavor. And not to mention, it makes the burger extra juicy. So I've blended the mushrooms with the meat. These look great. Let's head to the grill. I'm gonna add the pimento cheese so they can get nice and gooey on top. That pimento cheese on top complements that blended burger perfectly. Don't forget to submit your best blended burger recipe for the chance to win $10,000. You heard me, $10,000, child. That's a lot of money.
And for the first time, the Mushroom Council had a broadcast television commercial that aired on the Food Network in June, reaching millions of viewers during popular primetime shows like Chopped, Bobby Flay's Barbecue Brawl, and more.
Blend chopped mushrooms with meat for a delicious, nutritious, sustainable burger that could win you $10,000. Go to foodnetwork.com/blended burger contest and enter your best blended burger recipe. Brought to you by the Mushroom Council, celebrating fresh mushrooms.
All told, the Food Network campaign reached more than 90 million impressions and inspired more than 1,300 recipe submissions from both home cooks and pro chefs. The Food Network partnership was a success in and of its own, but it also became an important platform for new news about the blend. The Mushroom Council used the high-profile partnership to reconnect with food service audiences. We leveraged other media channels to encourage food service professionals to participate. So far this year, mushrooms have starred in more than 17,000 print, online, and broadcast media placements, reaching more than 877 million impressions. Interestingly, the popularity of mushrooms has itself become a common theme among the media.
I was gonna say, I remember kale was big for a while, and cauliflower had a moment. Is there any vegetable that's really up and coming this year?
We do have a vegetable that is not so up and coming, but it's going to be everywhere in 2021, and that is the mushroom.
And as consumers continue to increase the focus on their health and wellness, the Mushroom Council's years of nutrition research investments, media engagement, and education have earned a place for mushrooms in important nutrition coverage that makes an impact. Mushroom mania was in full effect at restaurants in 2021 as they opened back up for business and served their customers the plant-forward and plant-based dishes they had been craving. We saw successful launches like the chicken fungi sandwich at Whole Foods branded Planet Burger and a grilled mushroom sandwich at Togo's. Early in the year, Starbucks introduced their kale and portobello egg bites, and the Mushroom Council supported the launch with a Meatless Monday promotion. The Mushroom Council also partnered with Jersey Mike's in the launch of their new grilled portobello mushroom and Swiss sub.
We'd like to dedicate the next 5 seconds to fresh portobellos, and all the other seconds to peppers, onions, and Swiss. Because fresh ingredients make a sub above.
We promoted the new sub with PR, social media, and advertising, and mushroom industry members were eager to support the new mushroom menu item too. Jersey Mike's continues to advertise the meatless sub with their commercial that makes mouths water. With plant-based menu items trending, the Mushroom Council began a partnership with the Plant Forward Kitchen, a collaboration between the Culinary Institute of America and Google, and also participated in the Global Plant Forward Culinary Summit. Initiatives like these will continue through the end of the year and into the future, ensuring mushrooms hold their important role in the plant forward movement. For K-12 food service, as kids began to go back to school, mushrooms were back on the menu and in fresh new recipes. The Mushroom Council continues its active engagement with school districts and organizations, from hosting informative webinars to having a presence at state school food service shows in several different states. Mushrooms were proudly featured as Pennsylvania's Harvest of the Month in February, and we once again appeared on First Taste TV, a TV show dedicated to school food service. The outlook for the 2021-22 school year is positive, as we expect our efforts to spawn more mushrooms on even more school menus. Join 317,000 followers on the Mushroom Council's social media pages to stay informed of our campaigns. With new themes every month, we are proud to foster a community of mushroom lovers who share their passion for mushrooms and their appreciation of the mushroom industry every day.
Well, every year we wonder how we will top the headlines from the year before, but year over year, we continue to be amazed at how mushrooms continue to capture the imagination of influential media, retail dietitians, and food service operators. We continue to be amazed. I personally continue to be amazed every almost weekly when I pick up the news and see yet another cool mention about mushrooms in the media. So anyway, thank you. We're running a little longer than we had hoped here, but we've got time. As long as you're there, we're here. Now we'd like to welcome our guest presenters to start answer your questions live, and would also like to invite our board members, staff, and consultants to turn on their mics and cameras to participate in this discussion. Now, while we get everyone logged on here, Sonia, I have a question for you. What has your experience been like, having served on the Mushroom Council board of directors for the past 6 years, culminating in your serving as chair?
Well, in these past 6 years, I was able to sit next to such knowledgeable and talented individuals. I had learned the importance of diversity and how each one of us brought different strengths to the table or the screen. I always looked forward to the marketing tactics that were presented by the consultants, and just how we always talked about and focused on who our consumer was. Most importantly, I was able to witness how resilient our industry is. Something that I will always remember as your tagline, Bart: delicious, nutritious, and you guessed it, sustainable. How it truly was the way that the council pushed fresh mushroom sales. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And now I'm pleased to welcome our 2021 board members. If you could please wave hello when I call your name. Curtis Jurgensmeyer, Vice Chair from JM Farms. Fletcher Street from Ostrom Mushroom Farms. Ed Wench from Kitchen Pride. Joe Caldwell from Georgie Mushroom Company. Megan Klotzbach, Secretary from CP Yeatman and Sons and Mother Earth. Mark Moran, Treasurer from Kaolin Mushrooms and South Mill Champs. And Jane Rhino from Highline Mushrooms.
Very good. And I'm pleased to introduce the other folks who work on behalf of the industry here today. Of course, there's Cheryl Abate, Manager of Operations and Compliance, who's been with us for 15 years now. Mary Jo Feeney, our Nutrition Research Consultant.
Hi.
Melissa Marsden, our School Food Service Consultant. Steve Solomon, our Food Service Menu Strategist. And then from our, not our new PR agency, but the same one we've had for 5-6 years now, they just decided to change their name to Curious Plot. We have Amy Wood, our account director, Christy Mather, who's been the master of ceremony behind the scenes here, running the show, our strategic account lead, Eric Davis, who leads our media and PR initiatives, Kim Bedwell, who manages our nutrition promotions, and Adrian Rittberger, the master of digital online programs. And then, of course, the presenters, Anne-Marie Roerink, Marie Molde, Dr. Tim Richards, they're all still here, and Dr. Mark Lang. So there we go. They're all here and ready to rock. If you guys have any questions that you've funneled through Christy, let's do it.
So we have a question here about high vitamin D mushrooms. The question is asking about until a majority of growers sell high vitamin D mushrooms, the Mushroom Council is really not able to maximize marketing efforts around vitamin D. Is there anything being done to help move the industry along in that area? And I think that's a question for you to begin to answer, Bart.
Me?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Vitamin D, huh? Okay, all right, well, very good. Yes, 10 years ago, or whenever it was that we started this whole thing or discovered this whole thing, a little bit of a backstory was the representatives from Oprah told us that literally, quite literally, in answer to that question or acknowledging the legitimacy of that point made is, they said, well, when you got at least 2/3 of all retailers carrying vitamin D mushrooms, then we'll talk about it. But it's hard to go national with something that isn't nationally distributed. So that's an astute observation. As far as what the council can do to try and move that along, well, we do have a vitamin D section. We're continuing to draw attention to the fact that all mushrooms could be an outstanding source of vitamin D. And there does seem to continue to be growing interest by RDs, if not retailers now, and even from what Steve Solomon tells me, and others, that food service operators are even starting to pay attention to that as they look to boost the immunity presence on their menus. And so, by and large, the market has to really drive that, as Tim Richards and Mark Lang can probably tell you. That's, it's hard to force something like that. However, having said that, it's a great question in that it allows me to say that while we have yet to receive a formal proposal yet, we are talking to an accomplished and experienced retail dietitian who started off working in private label and has worked for many retailers. And we're trying to, we're talking to her about pulling a Steve Solomon, if you will, for us. And that is seeing if we can get her to help us execute some pilots in the marketplace, because at the end of the day, why would anybody do this? They would do it because it actually, we can sit here and talk to her blue in the face about how important vitamin D is and how wouldn't it be cool if mushrooms were to vitamin D what oranges are to vitamin C? And that's entirely possible given that mushrooms would be the only food that could supply 50% to 100% of vitamin D. And in marketing lingo, only trumps everything else. So intuitively, it seems rather obvious that that's the way that we should go. However, it isn't necessarily panned out in some of the data that and some of the research that we've seen in terms of putting it on the shelf. So we're still trying to find the and it also dovetails into some of the research that we're looking into doing next year. We've done some of it. Those of you that may have seen Dr. Lang's research on putting a label on nutrition label on packaging. Vitamin D did, other than just putting a label on it, a nutrition label, which was a surprise to everyone, just simply putting a simple nutrition label on a package of mushrooms provided a statistically significant increase in purchase intent. And then other than that, the only nutrient that provided the greatest add to that was vitamin D. So we have some empirical evidence or at least some survey evidence of its value, but we really need some more market evidence. We really need to try and do more to convince everyone, because this isn't as simple as antioxidants and blueberries. This is an expense you all have to go through to actually do it. So we continue to try and strive to prove the value of it beyond what may be logical. So I know that's a long answer and maybe not as definitive as some might like, but we continue to try and seek to prove its value or find how to communicate it in a way that does translate into dollars and cents for you investors. So anyway.
And Bart, we just received a comment in that notes that this month Kroger launched 5 vitamin D offerings under their private label.
Well, there you go. That sounds like a pilot to me. So hopefully we can get some information on that. And I know that is another thing we've been talking about is through this person I'm talking about. I have no reason not to mention her name other than we haven't contracted with her yet. So I don't want to, there's no point in bringing that up, but that is another thing that's on our radar. We're obviously aware of that. And if they are willing to share any of their information with us, we certainly would like to be a fly on the wall, if you will, to see how that might play out and if we can discern any measurable value. So good point.
Great.
Thank you.
Another question we have is related to brown mushrooms and food service. So if brown mushrooms are growing at retail, are we seeing any opportunities or threats even in the food service side? So that's a question for Steve.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe thanks, right? Because clearly it's, it's a tale of two sort of stories, right? The same thing that we've heard. We went ahead and looked at, because we've been talking about it with Bart about browns in food service, and we went back and took a look at it. And according to Datassential, the 4-year growth as of 2019 was 12%. That was larger than anything else in the mushroom category except trumpets. But that was as of end of year 2019. The 1-year growth was 3%. So that was even, that was great as well. Of course, you get to 20 and 21. And what's happened is from September, and we can't do this on a calendar year, but from September 2020 to June 2021, knowing that March was kind of the start of the pandemic, browns have been down about 11%. Now, if you look at why that is, there's some, again, good news and bad news here. If you look at why that is, you look at fast casual, that's up. Browns are, and by Browns, I'm really talking about creminis right now. But creminis are up 10% at fast casual. They're up 5% at mid-scale during this 2020 and 2021 period. Where they're down is at casual fine dining, which has been hurt the most, and QSR, which is down dramatically. So that's where we're really getting hurt. If we look at day parts, breakfast, creminis are up 3%. But lunch, and everybody knows what happened at lunch, right? You know, when people were quarantined, people weren't going out, they weren't going to work, they didn't go to lunch. We were down, creminis were down 53% at lunch last year. Dinner, flat. So, you know, creminis have always been, and browns have always been a great point of difference. They, you know, people, the chefs are more likely to menu that name instead of just saying mushrooms on a menu item. They'll say cremini mushrooms. And in fact, what we've seen is in the last 2 quarters of this year, about half of the LTOs, the limited time only, the specials like Jersey Mike's Portobello Sub, Portobello and Swiss, about half of those were using brown creminis or portobello mushrooms. So that includes Togo's, Jersey Mike's, Dave & Buster's, Friendly's, Uno, Shake Shack, Noodles and Company. So again, as I said, a tale of two stories, and hopefully we will get back, just like everything else, get back in 2020, the end of this year, and then into 2022, where we were looking like 2019. Hope that answers the question.
What do you think drives ingredient adoption at food service?
Ingredient adoption?
At food service, yeah.
Yeah, like, I'm trying to think how to answer that question, but ingredients on the menu and how they put things together. Well, you saw Marie's information about, menus have shrunk 10%. So I think what basically, a lot of things that if you look at her presentation, a lot of things that'll happen is if some things get hard to get, they will fall off the menu. You did see some people that would try and do other workarounds and whatever else, but in a lot of cases, they fell off the menu. If the prices got too high, what they would do is, absorb those, and take it themselves. But how long will they continue to do that when everything is increasing cost at food service? So what drives, I think the one thing that Marie said that was really, really important was in the next 2 years, innovation is what's going to drive everything. So, we are seeing immunity on the menu. I think the number is somewhere around 40% of people expect their restaurants to have immunity-oriented ingredients on the menu. They're also looking for nutrition. We know from Dr. Lang's research that nutrition is growing among consumer behavior. So it really is the things that we're talking about: nutrition, immunity. We do think sustainability. I'll say this: sustainability has taken a back seat during the pandemic because people have been more worried about staying open. So they've used takeout packaging. They've had to use more plastic. They've had to use, plastic utensils, all the rest of that. They didn't care about those kind of things, but this will become, it is at the top of mind for consumers. And I think it's going to start driving ingredients on the menu, within the next year and a half, 2 years. So really, really everything that we're doing, or the council is doing, is where the effect is going to be.
Great. Thanks, Steve. We have one last question. It's for Tim. With the strong tailwinds that mushrooms have, why do you think the average BCR is significantly below comparable industries? What would you recommend the top 3 action items be?
That's a great question. Without knowing the other industries and what they do in detail, that's kind of a hard question to answer. But to me, I think a lot of it goes to that we, without throwing the marketers under the bus, a lot of these other programs are, a lot bigger, a lot more mature. We're looking at the beef industry and the pork industry and the egg industry and things like that that are quite a bit bigger than the mushroom program and are quite a bit, they've been around for a lot longer. So I don't know in detail. That's, there's nothing fundamentally about what how the mushroom industry works relative to these other industries that would strike me as being, obviously an obvious explanation as to why they're under, and I think the important thing to remember is that, the programs that were allocated most of the budget from the council were the most effective. If you look at online, most of the impressions were online and print, and those were the big programs. So, in a sense, I think those comparisons were, I guess a little bit misleading without providing more detail as to what those other programs look like.
Great, thank you.
Good. So without, if that's it, then I think we've taken enough time of your time, valuable time today, and we appreciate your attending and your questions and input. And I'm sure we'll get more input after the fact. I often do. Note that today's meeting was recorded and will be available on your website at mushroomcouncil.org for your access. And thank you for the board members, guest presenters, and consultants for sharing your insights today, and passion for mushrooms that we share together all year long. And of course, for those of you investors in the audience and attending, this couldn't happen without you as well. And not just with your investment, but with your input all year long. So all things fungi, myco, mushrooms that we've been reading about, hearing about, make fresh mushrooms more than just a superfood. They continue to amaze us all by being the answer. Thank you.